Hello, and welcome to the Thief in the Empty Room podcast, where Zen meets business in a unique exploration of mindfulness and mental health. Join me, your host, Craig French, as I sit down with artists, entrepreneurs, and Zen teachers to uncover the secret of expanding creative problem solving, reducing stress, and finding balance in this fast-paced world. The name of this podcast is based off of my favorite koan, which is basically a short story fable used to teach aspiring monks and practitioners. This koan is as follows. A monk asks his teacher, "What concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state?" The teacher said, "It is like a thief who enters an empty room." Some commentary on this is said that the state of the ancestral masters who entered the ineffable is like a thief who has broken into a room with tremendous effort, only to find that the room is empty. In other words, the ultimate state of Buddhist study is recognition that reality exists as it is. It is empty of anything superfluous. There's nothing more or less than reality itself. With that being said, this is episode number 5 with my dear friend John Graves, who I actually consider my first ever Zen teacher. He was in charge of the Zen sitting group Dogen Sangha Los Angeles when I first joined him in Santa Monica, where we began to study these koans out of a book called Shobo Genzo. John talks about his philosophies on the human condition, interconnectedness, and meditation as a way to get to know your own mind. I hope you enjoy this episode. I am your host, Craig Jared French, and today I have my dear friend and technically my first ever Buddhist Zen teacher, Mr. John Graves. Say hello to interwebs, John.
Hello, interweb. I hope you are safe.
Just as a form of introduction to John and why he's on the podcast today. First off, as I mentioned, when I first moved to California, picked up a book from Barnes & Noble, which was called Zen Wrapped in Karma, Dipped in Chocolate, by my teacher and John's current teacher, Brad Warner. Brad was basically hosting a group in Santa Monica called Dogen Sangha Los Angeles, but was living in Akron, Ohio at the time. And he had left the group in the hands of my guest today, Mr. John Graves. And so when I finished reading the book, I Googled Brad afterwards. I found out he had a group in Santa Monica. I was actually living in Irvine at the time on an air mattress, but I had waited until I moved up to Hollywood. But I had emailed the group prior to get some more information. And John, you were the one who received the email. You wrote me back and said, "Hey, we sit on Saturday mornings. We'd love to have you." I mean, honestly, John, I know you're, humble about this, but I had no idea, receiving that email back from you, what it would lead to, what kind of doors would open up, the way it would change my life, that one email or the 2 emails, the one I sent you and the one you sent back to me. But I was excited to receive the email back. It took me a couple of months before I moved up to Hollywood and ended up hopping in my car one Saturday morning and driving from Hollywood to Santa Monica before I actually met you and we sat together. I'm actually writing a book right now about this whole journey and my life. And I'm sort of using that first session. I mean, it maybe didn't happen the very first one, but for argument's sake and for conversation's sake, something clicked in me the very first time you taught me Zazen, and I sat in complete silence in my own thoughts, in my own bullshit. Something clicked for me that was like, wow, this is maybe what I've been searching for this whole time, is the simple sake and act of sitting in silence and stillness, which is called shikantaza or Zazen. And you were the first person to teach me that. You were the first person to introduce me to Dogen and the Shinji Shobo Genzo. For that, I'm forever grateful. So that gives everyone a little bit of a background on John and our relationship. And from there, we've known each other for almost 10 years now. We've gone on multiple retreats. We've sat hundreds of hours together. But in addition to that, John has a really interesting background. He is a composer. He's a bassist, an improviser, a teacher. He performs classical music, jazz music, and probably most cool is he does trailer music for major motion picture Hollywood movies such as Foxcatcher and Argo, and Downton Abbey, for example, as even
Downton
Abbey.
Bam.
As I was saying it, I knew I was saying it wrong, so I'm glad you corrected me. And then another fun little story moment we had is you actually played in the little pit band of a Jason Alexander play called When You're in Love, The Whole World is Jewish, that I attended. The part that I find just funny and interesting and ironic with the timing of all this is, first off, I'm Jewish. I've always kind of felt like I was a Jubu, a Jewish Buddhist. And Rosh Hashanah just started last night. So it's an interesting time to bring up that play that you performed in many, many years ago. Regardless, John is incredibly talented, has found a way to weave passion for music into his Zen and spiritual practice. With that being said, John, I'd love to hear a little bit about, you and, even though I've known you for many years, bring me in back to, how did you find Zen and spirituality? What inspired you? Yeah, just curious to hear more about that and whatever you care to share.
I don't really have a highly unified story. When I was in maybe elementary school or middle school, I used to go to summer camp at UCLA. They have a program called Bruin Kids, children of employees. My dad was a neurologist at UCLA for many decades. Now he works part-time at the VA. Back when I was a kid, he was still working, and so I would go there for summer camp. And there part of the summer camp was martial arts. Part of the martial arts class was a little bit of silent sitting meditation. I'm pretty sure that was my first experience with sitting meditation. Fast forward, I go to high school, I go to college, no meditation or Buddhism in any of that. I think I had one friend in high school who, when I talked to him about my beliefs, he was like, oh, those are like Buddhism. But I didn't really care. I get a little older. I read some Buddhist stuff then, and it made an impact on me. But I guess I was looking for answers, maybe looking for better questions. I reconnected with my future wife. We'd known each other since we were kids. I proposed to her. She said yes. We're talking about wedding. How are we going to get married? We met in the Methodist church, but neither one of us were Methodists.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that you guys met in church.
Yeah, when we were little kids. We weren't like friends. 4 years apart when you're, 8 and 12. Like, you're not really hanging out. But she had experience with Buddhism and meditation. She wanted to have a Buddhist wedding. I wasn't opposed to that. I didn't want to have a Buddhist wedding without knowing what Buddhism was. And I would rather have whoever performed the ceremony not be some random, but like someone we knew.
How old were you at this point?
Late 20s. Today I am 45. My fiance introduced me to Buddhism. We started looking for sanghas in Los Angeles to practice with, and that led us to some pretty wacky, weird places, and eventually to a group that met like walking distance from our home in Palms near Culver City. Sangha in the Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh Vietnamese Zen tradition. That was my first practice community.
How many groups had you gone and visited prior to that one? Do you think?
I'm not sure. Let's see. We went to Zen Center Los Angeles, and my now ex-wife and I are both musicians. A lot of times, music that other people consider meditation music, I experience as work. Like, this is the kind of music that I would need to get paid for.
Interesting.
It's not relaxing to me at all. I feel like it's manipulative.
That's an interesting kind of, practice with like perception and perspective, because you could have a room of 100 people all listening to what most would consider peaceful, meditative music. And you could be the one person in the room out of 100 that music is driving you nuts because your brain goes to work mode, where everyone else is like sitting there like all like blissed out.
So I didn't have the vocabulary or the concepts to frame it at the time. What ultimately landed me in Zen practice was the simplicity of it, not the ease of it. It's hard, but it's simple. The problem we face is the human condition, and so just sitting with that ultimately is what bore fruit for me. So the problem with the Thich Nhat Hanh ensemble was that it met at 8 in the morning on Saturdays, but bell rings at 8. And if you're late, you're sitting in the little place where people leave their shoes. My ex-wife, she really had a hard time getting up that early. And honestly, so did I. We're both musicians, so sometimes, you're playing a gig on Friday night and then you're
Yeah.
waking up at crazy early in the morning for Saturday.
Yep.
So I started looking for something that was a little more musician speed.
Musician creator friendly.
Yeah, and by this point, I was already really into Buddhist studies. So I was going to the Bodhi Tree bookstore and I saw Hardcore Zen.
You caught the bug.
Yeah, yeah. I picked up Hardcore Zen because Guy in a Rock Band Buddhist book. I didn't go looking for Dogen Sangha Los Angeles at the time because at the end of that book, I think Brad's still in Japan. So I assumed he was still in Japan, definitely not in Los Angeles. There were websites when this was happening. I was able to go online and look for various Buddhist groups, and I was like, oh, the Hardcore Zen guy has a group, and it's super close. It meets at like 9:30, 10 in the morning, something like that, which is
Better than eight. Better than eight.
way better. Way better.
Okay, so you find this group, Santa Monica, that Brad Warner founded, and what happened from there?
I sat with the group most Saturday mornings. I made a bunch of friends. It was a fairly lively group at the time that I showed up. I kind of figured that was normal. Turns out it was quasi-normal. That a group like that, it shrinks and grows and people come and go, especially in a place like Los Angeles. But at the time, it felt like a lively community. We would go out to lunch. The practice was serious Zen practice, but then after that, it was friendly people going out to lunch and getting to know each other and enjoying friendship together. It was nice. Brad moved away. Things got messy, and then with the way the group was run, and he put me in charge, for better or worse. But that's what happened. Some people didn't like that. Some people liked it. I didn't feel qualified because I wasn't qualified. I decided to lean on his tradition. So when you showed up and we were using the Shinji Shobogenzo as a way to center our discussions, at least like once or twice a month, that's not any translation of Shinji Shobogenzo. That's Guro Nishijima's translation and commentary on Shinji Shobogenzo. So we were looking at that because it was Brad's teacher.
And for those listening that don't know what John and I are talking about specifically, Shinji Shobogenzo is 301 koan stories, which are little Japanese fables. Chinese originally. This is Dogen's favorite, 300 that he compiled. And then our teacher, Brad Warner's teacher, Guro Nishijima, he translated them and then added in his own commentary. So
who's the co-translator?
I was going to mention his name. It's funny you brought that up. Michael Letchford.
Okay. Yeah, just credit where credit is due.
Brad just this morning mentioned that he has a website called shobogenzo.net. Apparently, when Nishijima was in Japan and would give Dharma talks, they would set up a video recorder in the back of the room and film all of his talks on VHS. Michael Letchford apparently has all of them, or he got a majority of them and has started digitizing them and putting them on this website called shobogenzo.net. And Brad just happened to click on one of them, he said, like this past week. And the very first question of the first video he clicked on was him asking the first question, the Dharma talk, to Nishijima. So he had a little bit of a, kind of a funny full circle kind of moment. To John's point, John was running the Saturday morning sits when I showed up, and we would do 2 sits of Zazen for a half hour with a 10-minute walking meditation in between called Kinhin. And then we would have a little discussion. And instead of John leading a Dharma talk where he would have to come prepared every Saturday with a topic and a prepared speech, he elected to basically just go through this book week after week, which, has 301 of these. I'm still studying it to this day with Angel City Zen Center. And the koans always seem to, strike a chord in everyday life, even though some of these were written 800, 1,000, 2,000 years ago and have been relevant for that long, they still somehow manage to make sense and be relevant today as well, which I find absolutely amazing.
In general, I'm not a koan fan.
How come?
I'm glad you dig them. Just doesn't resonate with me.
Let's read one real quick that I picked out for
All
this
right.
to give everyone a little taste. One day a monk asked Tosu Daido of the Jo district, "How is it when the moon is not yet round?" Master Tosu said, "The moon swallows 2 or 3 moons." The monk said, "How about after the moon becomes round?" Master Tosu said, "The moon vomits 7 or 8 moons."
Not the standard for every Buddhist tradition, maybe most Buddhist traditions, is that there's no secret teachings. He said what he meant. He said it lots of different ways to lots of different people to try to,
There was times he didn't even say anything.
but he was trying to say things. If someone asked him a question and it was a sincere question about the teachings, he would do his best to answer. And maybe, so the koans are, I don't know, 1,500 years ago-ish, probably 1,000 years after the Buddha, but I don't know, hundreds of years before Dogen went to China, right? Dogen went to China, I think of it as like 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my Dogen year. Am I right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, that's an easy year to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and the koans are hundreds of years before that, but not thousands. No secret teachings. The Buddha answered questions in a straightforward way. The whole koan tradition is based on not answering questions in a straightforward way. It's pretentious and Chinese. Like, it's a Chinese glomming on from, probably it has more to do with Confucianism and how they approach things. And that's cool.
I also think it has a bit of an academic sort of like undertone to it as well. It was almost a way to teach and to train and to hold people to a certain level of accountability, stature, which is pretentious in itself.
Yeah.
Rating one person's responses to another, or the ability to memorize it or whatever, it's all a little bit.
Yeah, it's like you're not on the list. You can't come into the club.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really like that aspect of it. But to each his own.
But I don't want to say defense of Soto Zen, but at least in our approach to them, and the one that you initially introduced me to, it's not taken quite as seriously in our tradition.
Well, in Soto Zen, they're teaching stories, so it's like a jumping off place. Dogen uses them as jumping off places to talk about things. Yeah, that's true.
Totally.
Let's hear what Nishijima Roshi had to say.
This koan is concerned with the relationship between concepts and concrete things. Before we notice the difference between concepts and reality, we are apt to believe that concepts are themselves real. After we notice this difference, we can accept many conceptual representations of a reality that is beyond them all. How is it when the moon is not yet round? The full moon was a frequent symbol of the enlightened state or ultimate reality itself. Master Tosu Daido, Tosu Jisi in the text, said that the moon or the concept moon swallows 2 or 3 actual moons. That is, the concept is not the same as the actual moon. The complexity and ever-changing nature of the actual moon is simplified and obscured by the concept moon. And what about after the moon becomes round? After reality has been experienced directly, then the actual moon throws out many different concepts which attempt to describe some aspect of the actual moon. The actual moon is all its varied character, changing moment by moment, transcends the 7 or 8 conceptual moons.
What do you think of that?
It actually reminds me of another koan. A koan reminded me of a koan. The finger pointing at the moon. For those that don't know what I'm referring to, there's another koan, another famous one, where the monk is pointing at the moon.
Which finger's pointing at the moon?
Yeah, which finger's pointing at the moon? And so, the idea is that you're pointing at the moon with your finger. That's not the actual moon. The moon itself is in the sky.
Is the moon in the sky?
It's in our sky. It's in the sky in our head.
You're on the moon. The moon is not in the sky.
Correct.
Yeah.
Only a handful of humans have been on the moon to say that, but
yeah,
reality can only be really experienced in reality itself, and everything else is conceptualized in our brains through words, through language, through ideas, and that immediately breaks off from reality itself. And we're actually going to get into, you and I, and we could pivot there now, into Yogacara. I have a giant stack of books here that you guys who are watching can see. And the reason why is because these are all books that when I look at them on my bookshelf or I pick them up to read, John crosses my mind because he had a role in some capacity in all of these. And now that we're pivoting to Yogacara, John was the first one ever to introduce me to the practice and the study of Yogacara, which I became fascinated with in a similar way that he did. And this book, Living Yogacara, is probably the best written book on the teachings, and it's very, very complex. But one of the things Yogacara talks about is that we actually have a consciousness, probably, and even a bit of an enlightened state that exists right before conceptual thought. The second that we start thinking of these concepts, like the finger pointing at the moon, is the immediate breakdown of our natural sort of consciousness as it exists, completely uninterrupted and in its natural state. And Yogacara took it one step further and broke it down into a whole methodology that John and I will get into a little bit. But any thoughts or comments so far on what I've explained or mentioned about Yogacara?
What did you said, like an enlightened, undisturbed consciousness before? I don't really agree with that. I think there's no before for there to be a pure consciousness.
Well, what's before thought?
There's no before. No, it doesn't. You said thought, but it doesn't matter. You could have put there's no before soup. There's no before microphone. There's no before Tuesday.
Monday's before Tuesday.
It's also after Tuesday. But I have a calendar, and I know when, like, I'm in school, I know when my classes are, or my calendar knows when my classes are, so I don't have to remember. Consciousness, the Yogacara, as I understand it today, which is not as good as I understood it when I was
studying it.
Yeah, studying it, because I am definitely not studying it right now.
Yeah.
There's the object, there's the sense. Let me just wing it.
Wing it.
Object of consciousness, say, what's that? I pointed at the screen like you could see. You have a cup, right? What is that, a cup of water, glass of water, a mug?
Yep.
Can you move it closer so everybody can see it? Closer to you. No, yeah. Even closer, right to the edge. We're all looking at this mug. There's the glass, there's the sense apparatus. That's not their word.
Yeah.
And that's probably not the best word, but like there's your eyes, and then there's your visual consciousness. You can imagine a world where there are three separate things that can exist separately, but in reality they cannot exist separately.
And that brings us really to the whole, core teaching of Buddhism and Indra's net and the Diamond Sutra, and that we're all obviously interconnected, even though we all exist independently.
We do not exist independently as static objects. There's no static objects, but I think there's no static objects.
So one of the things that Yogacara took a deeper dive into that I always found really fascinating was they came up with two different terms are kind of at the core of, of their teachings, which is the manas, which is the mind of sort of I, of self, that we all have this inherent I, this independence, like John, I just said independent, we're all independent. And you said, no, we're not. And so I guess what I was referring to is we think we're independent, but
sure,
but we're not technically. So I think we're both correct, but you're definitely are more correct. And then they have something which is the most important part of the Yogacara teachings, which is the Alaya Vijnana.
What's the one in the middle? So there's 8, the 5 sense doors, 5 sense consciousnesses, because there's 8 total, right? So there's 5 sense consciousnesses. There's manas is 6. Alaya Vijnana is 8, and 7 is?
Well, mono consciousness is the thinking consciousness.
Oh, okay. Then so there's mono, manas, and Alaya Vijnana.
Correct.
So manas is 7?
Correct.
And mono is 6?
Correct.
Okay.
So, and the Alaya Vijnana is the stored consciousness, which basically gets formed from planting of seeds. And so with that being said, I am going to share my screen real quick. John, take it away, because you actually were going through your notes prior to this to this podcast, and you found this, so it's a perfect segue into this. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so at the top center, you have the storehouse. That is your memories, but it's also your culture, your genetic inheritance. It's everything that you identify with, and even things that you don't identify with that you don't know are there, but it's all your stuff.
It's all your stuff.
All your stuff. And those are seeds lying dormant in the store consciousness. Those seeds are the lenses that you view the world through. You know, like I'm an American. I might not want to view the world through the eyes of an American. That doesn't really matter. I'm going to view the world through the eyes of an American, through the eyes of me. Then, based on that interpretation of the world, I do stuff. And when I do stuff, my thoughts, my speech, and my physical actions in the world, all of that counts as action. This stage of the circle. And when I do stuff, that plants seeds in my storehouse consciousness. And around we go. So why does that matter? Why do you think it matters?
I think what the core of this teaching is getting to, and even what you're explaining right here on this chart, is that our actions matter. And the seeds that we're planting moment to moment matter. And a lot of times I think as humans, we don't always think our actions matter. We don't always think our thoughts matter. We also sometimes only think about them in relation to other people. Are other people seeing me doing these actions? Are other people seeing me, you know, act this way or behave this way? And if they're not, maybe I'm off the hook because no one knows.
There's a Kodo Sawaki, I think it's Kodo Sawaki quote, as soon as you steal something, you're a thief.
That's one of my other favorite koans, actually, is the thief koan. But yeah, exactly. And, you know, one of the things that I've thought about, that you've said before, is that when you've talked in the past about action, especially from a Buddhist, you know, perspective in relation to this conversation we're having, I remember you saying that when you're swimming, you're a swimmer. When you're running, you're a runner. When you're stealing, you're a thief. You could really only be what you are in that moment. And within that moment contains all these seeds and all these actions that are a result of those seeds. And as you said, those get put back into a storehouse. And so around and around we go. So that answers your question that you posed to me. Now I'm going to pose it back to you.
Yeah. So your storehouse is unconscious, right? So you don't consciously know it's there, but it's coloring your view of the world, and your view of the world colors your actions, and then your actions perfume the seeds in your store consciousness. You're stuck on a hamster wheel unless you become, even if you become aware of the cycle, you're still stuck on the hamster wheel. Maybe now and then you have a chance to do a little better. One of my favorite sentences in that book, Living Yogacaras, he talks about, he brings up the word fallibilism, which I had never heard. I've heard fallible, but like fallibilism, like the belief that I can be wrong, or I'm definitely wrong about something. And I almost by definition can't really know what I'm wrong about, because if I knew, then I'd correct my views.
And plus, you could just Google it, and Google will tell you if you're wrong or not.
Unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, there are things on the internet that aren't true.
Oh, man. My storehouse is shattered.
The problem with the internet is that everything on there was just some shit that somebody uploaded.
Is that how that internet works?
Yeah.
Do you feel like, I'm a big proponent, and I know what you and I have had these conversations, I feel like the core of my Buddhist practice is Zazen. Everything else that's happening around me, within the groups and society and my head, and everything is all sort of, you know, ancillary to me. It's the practice of Zazen. But then for some reason, you know, adding in Yogacara, even though it's not something that's overly studied, you know, in Zen, it's a little bit of like an offshoot, you know, underground sort of study for a lot of people, although it is becoming more popular. It stuck with me because primarily of this, diagram that you have up here. Do you feel the same way? Like, it's not like we're consciously walking around thinking that yogacharans, day in and day out. But to me, there was some level of truth I connected to with this teaching. And obviously, the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, and all that stuff resonated with me as well from a Buddhist perspective. But there's something about this particular concept that we're talking about that really resonated with me. Do you feel the same way?
For me, the fundamental thing isn't meditation, it's the three refuges.
Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha?
Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's sort of the ground for me. Meditation is good. The way that Yogacara influenced my meditation practice, I think what's important about it for especially American convert meditation-oriented Buddhism, I think I'm going to be judgmental here. I think there can be a little bit of arrogant machismo across traditions, not just Zen. The Asian Buddhist masters who are talking about these practices are like, this is a multi-lifetime practice in order to get free from suffering, maybe eons of rebirths. I don't really literally believe in reincarnation, and I think a lot of convert meditation-oriented Buddhists in the West don't either. So then they take the jump, oh, since I don't believe in reincarnation and these practices lead to enlightenment, then I must be able to do it fast. I still think it's a multi-lifetime practice to be free from all suffering, even if I don't believe in multiple lifetimes. I know that's
contradictory.
Yeah, but I do believe in multiple lifetimes. I just don't think any of them are mine.
There's a couple other books here that we don't need to necessarily get into, but there was one author in particular that, we've had a bond over. We both started reading him, and then we actually attended a lecture he gave at college at a hall in downtown Los Angeles.
It's a Little Tokyo, right?
Little Tokyo. The author is Yuval Noah Harari, and he is the author of 3 extremely successful books, New York Times bestsellers, and they are Sapiens, his original sort of one that put him on the map. His sequel to that was Homo Deus. The last installment, which he came out with fairly recently, within the last couple of years, was 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And John and I went for the talk that was congruent with this book. But, John, you and I would have these nice talks about Sapiens. Noah Yuval goes into a lot of deep esoteric topics. Some of them are hard to even sort of broadly state. He essentially, for those who aren't familiar with his work, he basically starts from like the beginning of humanity, when humans were basically first walking the planet, all the way to modern day times today. And then in some of these books like Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for 21st Century, he goes beyond today into what he predicts might be some challenges and issues that we're going to face as a society, as a race, moving forward if they're not addressed. And he talks a lot about technology and medicine and idea of free will and algorithms and AI taking over our lives. If we allow big data and Google and Facebook to collect all this data, and even your Apple Watch taking your heartbeat and things of that nature, then all of a sudden, every time you have a question, like an esoteric sort of existential even question for yourself, you could consult the data and the artificial intelligence for those answers. And so that brings into question, like, do we have free will at that point in time? And like one example he gives that resonated with me as someone who's been, has dated, especially the last 10 years or so in LA, is he kind of tells this whole story of, let's say there is a gentleman and he's kind of got feelings for 2 different women and he's trying to decide which one to marry. If he just solely relies on his own intuition, he's fearful he might make the wrong decision. So what he could do in the future is all the data that the computer has been collecting of him, all the websites he's been to, all the articles he's read, all the music he's listened to, he could actually consult AI and they could give him basically a list of pros and cons of both prospective women, and it could mathematically tell him, based off of the computer's calculations, which one would be the better lifelong partner for him to avoid a situation like divorce or heartache. And that is obviously a pretty scary thing to consider, that in maybe only a couple of years from now, people will be asking computers and algorithms choices that have been made for all of humanity up until this moment have all been made from your heart, your soul, your gut, your intuition, are now being potentially left to artificial.
I mean, isn't that, aren't we already there?
We are.
Isn't that what online dating claim? Not all of online dating, but some online dating claims to do that.
We are already there.
My retort is, you can have all this data, but how do you weight the data? One of your prospective partners likes the same kind of music as you, and the other prospective partner has similar spiritual values, but not, the other way.
We both don't have, yeah.
How do you weight those? WEIGHT, like there's no, I don't think there's a way to answer that question accurately. And I think companies that pretend there is are
lying,
or they're buying their own bullshit. If they believe it, then they're not really lying. They're just wrong.
So one of the things I found really fascinating about Yuval Noah Harari is that he wrote this whole anthology of books, and they're all very deep. They're all very esoteric. They all tackled really tough issues, societal problems, issues that we're going to have around medicine and environment. And the very last chapter of his most recent book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, I had no idea where it was going. And when I got there, I just had this moment, John. Maybe this is me being a little bit of an eternal optimist. But I get to chapter 21. It's titled
Meditation.
And I just found it fascinating, John, because here is this Israeli gay professor who is probably considered by a lot of people one of the most intelligent thinkers of our time right now, along with Malcolm Gladwell and maybe like a Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle. There's probably Bill Gates. There's probably an echelon of people and thinkers that in the academic sort of arena that have definitely risen a little bit to the top. And I would put Yuval in that category. And I just found it fascinating, John, that out of all the research he's done, even some of the sort of scary topics that he tackles and asks us to question, his conclusion was that in order to save ourselves from ourselves, he felt the best thing that we could do was to meditate. That gave me an incredible sense of relief, and not that he has all the answers, just the same way, the Buddha technically didn't even have all the answers. There was a sense of relief that I got from someone who's put in years and years of research to come to the conclusion that I feel like I came to, and that I believe that you've came to, is that sitting in silence is probably the number one way to attempt to rid ourselves to rid ourselves, to what's the word I'm looking for, not rid ourselves, but to protect ourselves from the onslaught of marketing, noise, pollution, both air pollution, noise pollution. Anyway, I think you know the point I'm trying to make, so I want to pass it back over to you and get any comments you have about that.
I haven't read his most recent book, the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is that right? But I've watched some of his talks about it, like one of them live and in person with you.
Yeah.
And his position on the special importance of meditation now, as opposed to in the past, is that we have these, I don't know if this is my term or not. Maybe I just made up this term. Megalopoly. Mega plus monopoly. That might already exist. Somebody else might have made that up. Megalopoly. I'll just say mega monopoly because that's clear. Facebook, Amazon, like big data.
Yeah.
His argument is that in the past, totalitarian regimes, they might want to know what's going on in your head but it was prohibitively expensive and partially technically impossible to do. Like they could have someone spy on you, but they couldn't have someone spy on everybody.
Right.
But now most people voluntarily let Facebook spy on them. And most people voluntarily let Facebook manipulate their minds, which is what advertising is, right? But not just advertising, but propaganda also. And there's been a lot of argument in the media about, what to do about social media manipulating people. How does Amazon know what you want to buy? I mean, it's incredibly convenient. It's also creepy. These companies now can know my mind better than I know my mind.
Right.
For the first time, in a way that totalitarian leaders in the past could not.
Yep.
That's the world we live in. If I want a shot at interrupting that cycle, it brings us back to the cycle of house, seeds, actions, seeds, and around we go. If you want a shot at interrupting that, meditation is a practice to give me a shot, not even a guarantee.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
I think it's important to be humble about what we're up against.
Do you think in some ways that meditation is more important now than it ever has been because of what you just stated and technology?
I don't know about more important, but it has become important for a new reason. But I don't think there was ever a time when getting to know your mind wasn't important.
Yeah.
For most people throughout history, I don't think they've had the luxury of getting to know their mind with a serious meditation practice. They were trying to not starve to death. That comes back to stuff in Sapiens. Everybody's just trying to get by.
Yeah.
It's always been everybody's just trying to get by.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we could wrap it up here. Obviously, if anyone thinks that there's any value to what Yuval Noah Harari is talking about with meditation, I encourage you to reach out to myself or to John. Find a meditation practice. That's partly why I started this podcast and this practice, is to make it more accessible to people, because I know what it's done for me. I think it's incredibly important to learn to sit with your own bullshit. And that's really what meditation has done. Just reminded me that you used to use a quote that I think you came up with. That's one of my favorite of all time. And you used to say, when you would give Zazen instructions, Zazen is like learning to become friends with yourself.
I did not make that up.
Where did you get that from?
I think that is the Tibetan Buddhist guy who founded Shambhala, was a drunk, Pema Chodron's teacher.
Changyam Trungpa.
Yeah, Chogyam Trungpa. I think that's a Chogyam Trungpa quote.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, he did a bunch of bad stuff, but he also was good at teaching Buddhism.
Yeah, one of his books was one of the first books that I found on my spiritual journey and path that led me down this road. So,
Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism?
No, I have it right here. The Sacred Path of the Warrior.
Yeah, I've seen that before. I haven't read it.
But I do love that quote, and I think that you're absolutely right in that with the meditation practice, you learn to become friends with yourself. And I remember you going even one step further and explaining it one time. You and I are friends. When I come to you and I want to ask you a question about something personal I'm going through, you sit and listen to me, because that's what friends do. A lot of people don't learn to sit with their own thoughts and conversations because they're too busy distracting themselves with television and music and work and family and constantly barraging their senses with. Yeah.
Or they do listen to their thoughts and they judge themselves.
Right.
Of course I think that. I'm a worthless human being.
Yeah.
I'm a failure.
So I think what we're doing in this practice.
What the hell kind of friend would I be if I was like, of course you think that. You're a worthless human being. You're a failure. You'd be like, that guy's the biggest jerk I've ever met. Some percentage of people identify with doing that to themselves. Like, I've certainly done that to myself. What a horrible thing to do to your friend.
Exactly. So I think what we're doing with this practice, we're learning to not do that. We're learning to not judge those thoughts. We're still going to have those thoughts. We're learning to not judge them.
It's tough because if you want to be true to that, you can't judge yourself for having those thoughts.
And you're not terrible for having them.
Right. Because you're just making it worse.
But you are terrible if you act on them.
If you do bad things to yourself?
Or to others after having those thoughts. If you allow the thoughts to translate into action, that's harmful to yourself or to others.
We're going to get into politics right now. You're not terrible if you do that to others. There's always a shot at redemption. Everyone has a chance to stop the cycle. And everyone who's not stopping the cycle is suffering.
That's the core teaching of Buddhism.
It is.
Life is suffering.
Grasping at conditioned things is suffering. Wanting and identifying the manas, clinging to the mono, right? That's suffering. When I say, this is me, this is mine, I don't want it to change, and I don't want anyone to threaten this. And it's not just about like physically threatening, just like people with different beliefs are a threat to my being. If I'm holding on and being like, this is what good is. What's valuable about the Yogacara practice of like looking at my fallibilism, like looking at what's wrong with me, or looking at the fact that I might be wrong about, I'm definitely wrong about something, right? So maybe it's definitely not worth demonizing people who believe differently because they're in the same boat. They definitely believe things that aren't true, but if they knew those things weren't true, they wouldn't believe them. They're trapped in ignorance. We're all trapped in some kind of ignorance. The only sane response to recognizing that is compassion for all beings.
The Way of the Bodhisattva. Funny enough, I have a book titled that right here as well.
That's my favorite book. It's my favorite Buddhist book.
And that's why I pulled it up for this talk, because you introduced me to this book. And if I ever think of you when I get there, line number 14 out of chapter 1, The Excellence of the Bodhicitta, is just as by the fire that will destroy the world, great sins are surely and at once consumed by it. Its benefits are thus unbounded, as the wise and loving Lord explained to Siddhana. The way out of suffering is to have compassion for all beings, which is the path of the Bodhisattva. Take Bodhisattva vows as Buddhist practitioners to sort of exemplify that.
Should we define the lingo? Bodhicitta, Bodhi, awakening, Chitta, mind. Guru Nishijima Roshi would call this the will to the truth. It's, I want to wake up, and I want to wake up for other people, and I want to help other people wake up. It's bodhicitta is all of that.
I mean, John, if I could just stop you for a second, I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yeah, for sure.
I want to wake up, and I want to wake up for other people. I mean, if there's one thing that we could take away from this whole podcast, with one another, is like, how beautiful is that? Like, we both wanted to wake up. I think is why we met and what brought us to practice. And why we became friends is because we wanted to wake up for other people and share that compassion with one another and with, as you mentioned earlier, Sangha, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So continue your thought, but I just want to pause on that for a second because that's a beautiful line you just stated.
I guess I would just balance that, what he's saying there and what I'm agreeing with and what you're agreeing with that he's definitely looking at this within the frame of multiple lifetimes. Even if you don't believe literally in multiple lifetimes, the humility that the trap is, Buddhism's great, Buddhism's going to save the world. Buddha lived 2,500 years ago and shit's still kind of fucked up. So thinking that Buddhism is going to save the world right now in some kind of like forever permanent, we're done kind of way, a little bit of humility is
and a little bit of delusion as well.
Well, we're stuck with the delusion.
Well, my friend, thank you for playing a role in helping me to awaken, whatever form that has taken, who knows. Forever grateful for the role that you've played in my personal journey. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope it wasn't too painful for you to be a part of this.
I want to make it clear why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because you asked me, and I stopped talking about Buddhism publicly a few years ago and that's been working out with me. I'm not saying I'll never talk about Buddhism publicly again, and I'm obviously doing it right now. But the reason I'm doing it is because you asked me.
Thank you.
Like I didn't hesitate. And if someone else asked me, I would also not hesitate. And I would not hesitate to say no.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. Well, thank you for saying yes.
Thank you for being you and being my friend. And
thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Take care. If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the whole podcast. And for that, I want to say thank you. Please feel free to visit my website or social media for more information on my work at Craig Jared French. Until next time.